Good day, class! I am teacher Heidi, and now we'll be discussing more about the Harlem Renaissance. So, for you to have a deeper understanding about this movement. So, let's start. The Harlem Renaissance was the development of the Harlem neighborhood in the New York City as a black cultural haven in the early 20th century and the subsequent social and artistic explosion that resulted. Lasting roughly from 1910s through the mid-1930s, the period is considered a golden age in African American culture, manifesting in literature, music, stage performance, and art. So, in this slide, it is highlighted that the Harlem Renaissance in the 20th century was the development of the Harlem neighborhood as a black cultural haven in the New York City. And in between these years from 1910 to 1930s, the period of this movement is considered a golden age in the African American culture, exhibiting the literature, the music, the stage performance, and art. Okay, so now let's move on with the impact of Harlem Renaissance in America and to the world. So, the Harlem Renaissance was the face of a larger new Negro movement that had emerged in the early 20th century and in some ways ushered in the civil rights movement of the late 1940s and early 1950s. So, the social foundations of this movement included the great migration of African Americans from rural to urban spaces and from south to north. Dramatically rising levels of literacy, the creation of national organizations dictated to pressing African American civil rights, uplifting the race and opening socioeconomic opportunities and developing race pride, including Pan-African sensibilities and programs. The Harlem Renaissance was a golden age for African American artists, writers, and musicians. It gave these artists pride in a control over how the black experience was represented in American culture and set the stage for the civil rights movement. So, in here, we can say that the Harlem Renaissance was a turning point in black cultural history. It helped African American writers and artists gain more control over the representation of black culture and experience. And it provided them a space or a place in Western high culture. The Harlem Renaissance also laid the groundwork for all later African American literature, and it had an enormous impact on black consciousness worldwide. Okay, so we're done with the impact of Harlem Renaissance in America and to the world. Now let's see how it comes to its ends. So, the end of Harlem Renaissance creative boom began with the stock market crash in 1929 and the Great Depression. It wavered until Prohibition ended in 1933, which meant white patrons no longer sought out the illegal alcohol in uptown clubs. So, the decline of the Harlem Renaissance was due to the Great Depression. It led to more economic stability and led to the people focusing their interest elsewhere. People were now too busy worrying about what is going to happen to relish in the revitalization of Harlem. The Harlem Riot of 1935 further put an end to the idea of optimism in the black community. It was a race riot brought upon by rumors of the beating of a teenage shoplifter. Alright, so now that we're done discussing other important points on the Harlem Renaissance, let's continue by knowing the notable writers during this period. So, the first one is W.E.B. Du Bois. So, William Edward Burgard Du Bois is an American sociologist, historian, author, editor, and activist who was the most important black protest leader in the United States during the first half of the 21st century. He shared the creation of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP, in 1909. So, the NAACP in 1909 is an interracial American organization. It is created to work for the abolition of segregation and discrimination in housing, education, employment, voting, and transportation, to oppose racism, and to ensure African Americans their constitutional rights. Okay, so let's take a look on one of his works. So it is namely The Souls of Black Folk in 1903. So his collection of essays presents his argument about a path toward progress for African Americans, enfranchisement, political power, and education. Next, we have Fawcett. So, Jesse Redmond Fawcett, dating back from 1882 to 1961, is a New Jersey native who was born on April 27, 1882, in Camden Country. So, she was raised in Philadelphia and went to the girls' high school there. So she was most likely the first black female student to attend Cornell University after receiving a scholarship, and in 1905 she earned a Bachelor of Arts in Classical Languages there. Then she starts to write for NCCAP's official magazine, The Crisis, in 1912. Alright, so though she helps promote other important writers' work, Fawcett still continue to publish her own poetry and short fictions in the magazine, as well as for novels including There Is Confusion in 1924 and The Plum Ban in 1929. Okay, so here are also some of his works. First, we have There Is a Confusion in 1924. So this examined how the new black people, middle class, and black creative arts were changing mainstream culture. So Fawcett addresses the themes of racial uplift, patriotism, hope for the future, and black solidarity using the forms of the novels of Manners. Okay, so down to our next, The Plum Ban in 1929. So, it is a novel without a moral. It is also frequently regarded as a significant work of the Harlem Renaissance. The next notable writer we have here is Nella Larsen. She was a writer of novels in the United States. She wrote two novels, Quicksand in 1928 and Passing in 1929, as well as a few short tales while working as a nurse and librarian. Despite her limited literary output, she was well known among her contemporaries. She and the characters in her stories struggled with issues of racial identification and class alienation, but they also struggled with universal themes that cut across gender and ethnicity, such as the fundamental dread of being rejected and abandoned by loved ones. Both contemporary researchers and her contemporaries have praised her work. So in 1930, Larson became the first person of color to be awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship. However, her writing career was quickly derailed by allegations of plagiarism and a failing marriage. In her later years, she eventually ceased publishing and resumed her nursing career. Okay, so we also have here some of her works. So the first, we have Quicksand in 1928, which tackles topics that are both racial and intercultural. Next is The Passing in 1929, which talks about the reunion of two childhood friends and their growing fascination with each other's lives. And for the last writer, we have here Jean Tumor. So, he is an American poet and novelist commonly associated with the Harlem Renaissance. It is said that he was born in Washington, D.C., into a family with both white and black ancestors. And his grandfather was the first black governor in the United States during Reconstructions. So, here's also one of his notable works entitled Cain in 1923, which talks about the origins and experiences of African American in America. And to end our discussion, I just want to give you a quotation from Zora Neale Hurston, saying, "Once you wake up thought in a man, you can never put it to sleep again." Alright, so for our generalization, I want you to answer these questions. So first, among the writers that have been discussed earlier, who caught your attention? Second, what characteristics made Harlem Renaissance unique from other literary movements of modern period? And last, what do you think is the impact of movement to the future literary periods? Also, I want to remind you about our quiz. So, the link of our quiz will be sent on our group chats. So, you can answer it after our discussion. And lastly, for your assignment, so among the notable writers of Harlem Renaissance, choose the one that you think plays the very important role and make a creative infographic about them. So, I guess that was all. Thank you so much, class, for your active participation, and thank you also for listening. I hope you learned something from our report, and happy learning!